To DNF or not to DNF? That is the question. 'Tis nobler to suffer through a book you don't enjoy, or close it and put it aside. This is the question we will answer today. Sometimes you're really excited about a book. It has your favorite tropes, and yet it's just not working for you. Do you push through, hope it gets better? Or do you give up reluctantly and move on to a different book? I used to finish every book that I read. I was determined to push through, no matter how much of a bad time I was having. Not finishing a book to me was like I failed. I was a bad person. I had somehow let myself down. This could be a product of the fact that I was an English major and you kind of had to finish every book to write a paper. Or it could be because I'm a people pleaser. Take your pick, either one. But once I accepted that DNFing a book wasn't a bad thing, my reading life changed for the better. So much so. For example, I DNF'd 2 books last night. Back to back. Opened one, didn't like it. Opened another one, didn't like it. Okay, didn't even get that far into them and I just was not feeling it. So I just stopped. Funny thing is, they were both dark romance books. That's what I was in the mood to read. Wasn't because there was any kind of trigger that I didn't like. The books just, they weren't hitting the spot. I don't know, just something about them, just little tiny things. And that happens. I DNF'd a book about 2 weeks ago, simply because it was in third-person POV. And it was a romance book, and I didn't care for that. I honestly didn't know they wrote romance books in third-person POV until I picked that book up. So, there's that. I DNF'd a book back in October because the MMC went from being this like strong, scary, masked stalker guy to very wimpy when he actually talked to her in person. It was just like, I don't like that. That's not what I'm here for. So stop reading that. And I DNF'd a book last summer because of the weird phrasing the author was using. For example, instead of saying rosebud, there was a part that said bud of rose. There were other things like that, but that's the one that comes to my mind immediately. Yeah, Also, she kept saying that the MMC smelled like sulfur. And I've watched Supernatural, so sulfur smells like rotten eggs. That's not appealing. Truly, there are a myriad of reasons not to finish a book, and none of them are wrong. Not finishing a book doesn't even mean it was a bad book. It just means it wasn't a good book to you. Perhaps you weren't the intended audience. Perhaps you had expectations that were not met. Perhaps you misunderstood what the book was about. Perhaps you were tricked into buying the book because the author made it seem like certain tropes were there, but they really weren't. I'm not bitter. I'm not speaking from experience at all. And as an author, if someone DNF'd one of my books, first of all, how would I know unless they just go on the internet and brag about it, which feels kind of mean. But I don't care. I'd be kind of sad because I think my book's awesome, but maybe it wasn't for you. Not your cup of tea. And that's okay, because I DNF books all the time. It's kind of freeing, actually, just knowing you can just drop it and move on with your life. Life's too short to read books you don't like. There's no point in forcing yourself to read something that makes you dread reading time. Reading time is sacred. It's beautiful. I love my reading time. So those are some of the reasons and thoughts that I have on DNFing books. I'm kind of nitpicky. Like I said, I was an English major. I now teach English. So sometimes it can be as silly as there are a lot of fragments in this book. And as someone who is trained to give bad grades for fragments, I just have to close that book and say, you're not for me. You're not for me. Sometimes if a name is too strange. I did a previous video on this. Sometimes I push through, sometimes I don't. Depends on the name and how I feel about it. I'm very picky. I acknowledge this about myself. So there's that. Those are my thoughts. What are some reasons you don't finish a book? Are you someone who pushes through no matter what? Is there a popular book that everybody loves, but you couldn't stand, and so you just didn't even finish it? That's okay. It's not for everybody. Just because 100 people love something doesn't mean you love something. Works for books, works for your favorite food too. If you're an author, if someone DNF'd your book, how would you feel about that? Kind of like, meh, whatever. Or you feel like personally like, oh, I'm sad. That's mean. All thoughts and comments are welcome. Happy reading or not reading. Depends on the book.